All right, let's look at midweek number 70. I know it's been forever and a day since you guys did a midweek, so you probably won't remember this, but let's review. So, common interrupters such as however, by the way, I suppose, etc., 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 are all known as what kind of expressions? I'll just give this to you guys because it has been quite some time. They are parenthetical expressions. And if you can't spell that, just wait till the next slide because remember the answers will be at the top. And whenever the word well, why, yes, or no is used as a sentence opener, it is generally set apart from the sentence by what punctuation? You got it? It's a comma. We love our commas. Always use the commas. And you want to set off and what with its modifiers with commas because it is not essential to a sentence. What do we call nouns that describe other nouns? Like Jen, comma, my best friend in the world, comma, says hello, which she doesn't, by the way. She says hi. That my best friend in the world bit that tells me more information about who Jen is starts with an A. It's a positive. I hope you got that right because I told you they never go away. And blank blank refers to a noun or other identifying words with which we sometimes interrupt a sentence to show to whom we are speaking. Creative writing, you guys did this when you had one of your poems when you are talking to someone and you say like, hey mom, can I go do this? Or hey Trent, pay attention, or whatever the case may be. That word, that noun that you call them out for, that is a direct address. A direct address. And after writing the first part of a blank or a blank, you want to put a comma both before and after each additional part. These were the two things that you guys are having issues with the commas. You wanted me to check it. When you are writing a letter, you have to put an address, which is the second one. And then when you're talking about what day it is, it's a date. Right. So the date and an address, you want all the commas. So there's the answers up at the top if you need them. Pause it if you need to write it or spell it because I'm just going to keep flying by. So, adjective clauses. Remember, they start off with the relative pronouns. Who, whom, whose, which, that. I repeated them 3,500 times back sophomore year. You probably remember me getting irritated with me with that. So, adjective clauses, like any old adjective, describe the two parts of speech. What do adjectives describe? I'm really crossing my fingers here that you guys said noun and pronouns because that is what adjectives describe, nouns and pronouns. So to decide whether or not your adjective clause needs a comma, you have to ask yourself what purpose that clause is serving. And this can get a little tricky, okay? So if you have all students versus all students who can type right, the adjective clause in B makes the noun students refer to more students or fewer students. Give you a second to think about it. It's going to be fewer students because not all students can necessarily type right. So this is going to be less than A. Same kind of thing with B. You got A, people, versus B, people who fail to vote. So A means all people. People is everybody. But by adding the clause who fail to vote, are we increasing or limiting the number of people that we're talking about? We are limiting them because not everyone failed the vote. Some people did. So, to restrict, we know means to limit the number. So when we say that the use of a parking lot is restricted to customers, we mean that its use is, pay attention to this word, it's limited to customers and that they are not allowed to park there. Not everyone can park there. So circle, star, highlight this old chunk right there. A clause that restricts or limits the number of the word it modifies or describes is called a restrictive clause. So that stuff from up here, like who can type right, who failed to vote, would be considered restrictive. It limits the number of people it refers to. So a restrictive clause makes the word it modify mean less or more than it would mean without the clause. So since it's limiting and restricting, we know it's going to be less. Ding, ding, ding. So, students who do failing work may not participate in sports. So this sentence is not making a statement about all the students. It's making a statement only about those who do what? Who do failing work. Those are the only ones not allowed to not allowed to participate in sports. So because that clause restricts or limits the number of people that we're talking about, the number of students, it is considered a what kind of clause? Keyword here, a restrictive clause. Still an adjective clause. Don't get that wrong. It's just a subcategory of what kind of an adjective clause. It's a restrictive adjective clause. So, a sentence usually becomes untrue or absurd whenever you take out that restrictive clause, and circles are highlighted. Because a restrictive clause is essential to the meaning of the sentence, it does not have commas. Does not have commas. Imagine me like pounding on my podium as I say this because I am emphasizing it does not have commas. Now I know that seems weird because restricting it, you would think, oh, it has commas around it, but it's the opposite. It does not have commas because you can't take it out of the sentence. Remember, things with commas can be taken out of the sentence. So restrictive, no commas. So if we have visitors who stay too long are not welcome. Should this have commas? Absolutely yes. Here's why, okay? If we take out this adjective clause of who stay too long, we change the meaning of the sentence to say visitors are not welcome. It's not that visitors are not welcome, it's only the visitors who stay too long are not welcome. So we do not put commas because we do not want to take this out of the sentence. It's way too important to take out of the sentence. Okay? So a newspaper should not publish any news that has not been carefully checked. So again, if we were to take out this adjective clause, we have a newspaper should not publish any news. Obviously that makes zero sense because that's the job of a newspaper. So is this clause too important to the meaning of the sentence to be set off with a comma? Yes, it's way too important. We have to include it in order for this to logically make sense. So suppose that a druggist or pharmacist were to put a sign in a window to advertise for a salesperson, because apparently we're in like the 1950s in this sentence. So we have a salesperson is wanted versus a salesperson who has a car is wanted. So which statement would restrict or limit the number of applicants who are going to apply for the job? Obviously it's going to be B, because only those who have a car would be able to apply to the job. Whereas A means any salesperson can go on in and try to apply for the job. Hopefully you guys are following so far because I have no idea. So, a salesperson who has a car is wanted. So not anyone can apply for this job, only those who have a car. So therefore, who has a car is considered a what kind of clause? I don't mean adjective. What kind of adjective clause? A restrictive clause. Still adjective, but it's a restrictive clause. It's restricting who can apply for this job. So dictionaries which are too small are not very useful. Again, remember, restrictive clause is essential to the sentence. If we take this out, we have dictionaries are not very useful. Now, you guys might think that, but I would disagree because dictionaries tell us all the words. So therefore, it should or should not be set off with commas. It should not. It's way too important. Should not. Okay? Now, less frequently, your adjective clause is just there to give a little extra information about the word that it describes. And such a clause can be taken out of the sentence without destroying the accuracy of your statement. So if we have Hal Smith, comma, who composes music, comma, is a professor. Is the sentence still true when we take out this little adjective clause? Yes. Hal Smith is still a professor. The fact that he composes music, I mean, yeah, sure, that's great, but it's not the most important thing in this sentence. It's not important to knowing who the heck he is, so therefore, commas go around it. any number can be divided by 2 is an even number, versus Crater Lake, comma, which is 2,000 feet deep, comma, has no inlet or outlet. So which sentence can my clause be taken out of the sentence without damaging the meaning of the sentence? Well, obviously any number is not an even number because not every number is an even number, whereas Crater Lake has no inlet or outlet still does make sense. And of course, our signals of the commas. So the correct answer is B. And of course the answers are up at the top. Sorry. So circle, star, highlight this chunk. Right? Look at my highlighting. It's fantastic. I can't do that on my whiteboard. My Promethean, I'd have to stab it too many times in order to achieve that. So just get that image of me stabbing a lot in your mind. Yeah. Okay, so in any case, a clause that merely adds a fact that's not essential to the meaning of the sentence is called a non-restrictive clause. It doesn't restrict it, it just adds the extra facts. So therefore, a non-restrictive clause is more or less important than a restrictive one. Well, it is going to be less important because it's just tiny little extra details that you don't necessarily need. So because the non-restrictive clause is just extra information that can be taken out, same way any parenthetical expressions of positives or direct addresses can be taken out of the sentence and still make sense, you put commas around it, okay? So somewhere on the side, put restrictive equals no commas, but non-restrictive equals commas. And I'll say that again. Restrictive equals no commas. Non-restrictive equals commas. Okay? So if we were to punctuate the sentence, her birthday, which is on Christmas, receives very little attention. The fact that it is on Christmas does not take away from the fact that her birthday receives very little attention. It's just extra information. So therefore, it needs a comma on both sides. Okay? So anyone who lives in Bedford knows Aunt May. Aunt May, who lives in Bedford, knows everyone in town. So if we look at this first one, anyone knows Aunt May versus Aunt May knows everyone in town. Which sentence should the clause be set off with commas because it's not essential to the meaning of the sentence and therefore is considered non-restrictive? I'll give you a second to think about it. It is B. Because with A, does anyone in the entire world know Aunt May? Of course not. She's not that popular. Don't give her a false ego. It is B. Alright, so rich people who pretend to be poor are awful versus Mr. Sullivan who pretends to be poor is really very rich. So we've got rich people are awful versus Mr. Sullivan is really very rich. So which sentence requires the commas because that clause is non-restrictive? It is B. The fact that he pretends to be poor isn't necessarily changing the fact that he's very rich. Whereas not all rich people are awful, just the ones who are poor are awful. Or pretend to be poor are awful. Sorry. So, it's against the law to use a stamp, comma, which has been canceled. Shakespeare died at 52, comma, which was considered an advanced age at that time. So which sentence should not have a comma because that clause is necessary for the sentence to make any sense? It has to be A, because it's not against the law to use a stamp, just not one that has been canceled. Okay, so occasionally the same clause can be either restrictive or non-restrictive, just depending on what you mean it to say, because the English language is oh so challenging sometimes. It's fun, we love it. So say with this, Mr. Cruz sold his land which was unprofitable. If we meant that Mr. Cruz sold only the part of his land which was unprofitable, you would need to make the clause restrictive, keyword here, by either using or omitting a comma. Remember, restrictive means we are lessening it. So can we take this out of the sentence if it's restrictive? No. So it would be omitting a comma. No comma there. Now, Mr. Cruz sold his land, which was unprofitable. So if we wanted to mean that all of his land was unprofitable, and therefore he decided to sell all of it, we would make the clause non-restrictive, keyword here, non-restrictive. By using or omitting a comma, we would need to use it right after land. Okay? So again, if it's restrictive, no comma. If it's unrestrictive, commas. So do not use string, which is too weak. Do not use string, comma, which is too weak. So which sentence suggests that you avoid only using certain string, the string that is too weak? That would have to be A. Okay? This string is too weak, so therefore no comma. Or sentence suggests that you should avoid using all string because all string is too weak for this. Obviously, B. Because if we take that out, we have do not use string because all string is going to be too weak. Okay? Now, participle phrases. Remember those phrases that either end with ing, those present participle phrases, or past participle phrases that tend to end with like ed, d, nt, any past form of a word. They can also be restrictive or unrestrictive, same way adjective clauses can. So, if we have all cars leaving Chicago Ridge were stopped by the police versus Max excusing himself politely went upstairs to study, which sentence needs commas because that ing, that present participle phrase, is not essential to the meaning of the sentence? It would have to be B. Because Max went upstairs to study still makes sense. The fact that he excused himself politely, not so important. But all cars were stopped by the police? No, that would be a ridiculous waste of their time. It's just those that were leaving Chicago Ridge. And before you guys even think it, though I'm sure you've already had, no, Chicago Ridge is not part of Chicago. It's a suburb of Chicago, which does not make it part of the city. It's right next to Oak Lawn, and we used to call them the Ridge Rats, actually, because, yeah. Alright, so moving on. So you're going to supply the necessary commas. If the comma is restrictive because it's essential to the sentence, add no commas, just write none. So Willa Carter, who was born in Virginia, wrote stories about the American West. So we know my adjective clause is who was born in Virginia. We know that's the clause because it starts with who. If we take it out of the sentence still makes sense. So the question is this so important that it should not have commas? Or should it have commas because it's just extra information? I would agree with you if you said it's just extra information. So therefore, comma after Carter, comma after Virginia. It is non-restrictive. It is the policy of our restaurant to serve no food which we would not eat ourselves. So our adjective clause, starting with which, going to the end. If we take that out of the sentence, we have, it is the policy of our restaurant to serve no food. Does that still make sense? Not so much. So therefore, it is restrictive, no commas. So just put none. Caffeine, which is present in both tea and coffee, stimulates the heart and raises blood pressure. So our chunk right here, which is present in both tea and coffee, does give us a little bit more information about caffeine, but does it take away from the meaning of the sentence? No. Caffeine still stimulates the heart and still raises the blood pressure. So therefore, it's non-restrictive, does need commas on both sides. Roebuck, who wrote many stories, was one of the outstanding writers of her day. So we've got who wrote many stories. If we take that out of the sentence, we have Roebuck was one of the outstanding writers of her day. Still makes sense. This is just a little extra information about what the heck she actually wrote. So therefore, it would be non-restrictive. It would still make sense, so it needs commas on both sides. We seldom I hate this little pop-up thing. We seldom interrupt a person who is praising us. So if we take out who is praising us, we seldom interrupt a person. That doesn't necessarily make as much sense because we seldom interrupt people, only the people who praise us. You don't tend to stop people when they're giving you compliments. So therefore this is restrictive, no commas. Okay? So there are the answers for that one if you still needed them. And we're almost done. So one should be suspicious of any investment which offers an unusually high rate of return. So we've got our adjective clause of which to return. If we take that out, we have one should be suspicious of any investment. Now you don't necessarily need to be suspicious of any investment, just the ones that offer unusually high rates of return. So since that is necessary for the sentence, it is a restrictive clause, no commas. So just put none. It turned out that Shirley Smith, who was the chosen Dairy Queen, is allergic to milk. Dairy Queen, like not the restaurant, like she has a crown or something like that. So who was chosen to be the Dairy Queen? So if we take that out, we have it turned out that Shirley Smith is allergic to milk. That still makes sense. It's not like this is restricting anything. It's just extra information about her. So therefore it's non-restrictive, should have commas on both sides, after Smith, after Queen. In our living room, we don't have a single chair that is really comfortable. Where's my adjective clause? Who, who's who, which, and that. So that is really comfortable. If we take that out, we have in our living room, we don't have a single chair. Well, it's not that we don't have any chairs in our living room. We just don't have any that are really comfortable. So since this restricts it, it is a restrictive clause, no commas. My parents, hearing of this opportunity, moved our family to Chicago. We don't have any adjective clauses, but we do have a present participle phrase. So if we take that out, we have our parents moved our family to Chicago. This fact that they heard of a new opportunity or whatnot, not necessarily as important, so you can put commas around it. This book will be valuable to anyone wanting to take better pictures. We've got wanting to take better pictures. This book will be valuable to anyone. Will it be valuable to anyone? Maybe not. Maybe just only to the ones who want to take better pictures. So since this is necessary to the sentence, it is restrictive and therefore no commas. None whatsoever. Okay? So I hope that made sense. This one, I will admit, is a little bit more tricky, especially when we look at the worksheet. So let me do that. Please be sure you actually click the worksheet for your class. I mean, it's like the same worksheet essentially, it's just different sentences. So just be sure you're clicking the right one.